Hello folks, welcome to Outdoors with Bud. I'm your host, Bud Fields. Hey, I wanted to come in here since it's still archery season here in the state of Indiana and there's a lot of bow hunters out there. I'm going to show you some of the different type of archery equipment that is available. I used to have what they called a traditional longbow. It was the one that like Howard Hill and Bob Swinehart and some of those guys used years ago. It was one of the very first type of bows made. Well, I've got with me today, I've got a recurve bow. The reason they call this a recurve, if you can see these bow limbs, this is the grip, the handle part. If you notice, this limb will come downwards, and then it swoops back up like a ski jump. Well, this is the recurve part of it here. Now, this bow is one of my long old time favorites. It was a Howlett high speed. It was made in Kokomo, Washington. And if you ever buy one of these and you don't know how long it is or what the poundage is, if you look on usually the bottom limb, you'll see a series of numbers right here, right above the logo. Okay, this says 42 at 28. That means that this bow develops 42 pounds of thrust, 42 pounds of power at 28 inches. There was a wives' tale, so to speak, at most of the designers of these bows back in the 60s and the 70s, and well, actually probably in the 40s and the 50s. The average male would pull back a 28-inch arrow. If you pulled a 28-inch arrow back with this bow, you were holding 42 pounds of thrust pressure. Now, if you pulled back a 29-inch arrow, let's say you've got longer arms, for every inch above 28, you would add 2 pounds to this bow. In other words, this is 42 pounds at 28 inches. If you pulled a 29-inch arrow, it would be 44 pounds. Now, if you're like me and you got fairly short arms, for every inch under 28 inches, like 27 inches, you would deduct 2 pounds. So if you pulled a 27-inch arrow, you'd be shooting a 40-pound bow. Well, then it also would have a serial number down here. Now, the old recurve bows, they were basically one piece. This is a one-piece bow. It's basically made out of wood. Now, the limbs right here, they're fairly thick. The limbs are made out of wood and then laminated fiberglass. Now, what I mean by laminated is there's a layer of fiberglass, there's a layer of wood, there's a layer of fiberglass, and there's another layer of wood inside of this, and they're laminated, they're glued and bonded together, and that gives this bow the strength. Now, these bows, a lot of people use them for like shooting, going deer hunting, shooting in their backyard, and a lot of people were using recurves back in the days for tournament competition. This was before the advent of the compound bows. Now, the thing about these bows, they were usually much prettier. The wood and everything was much prettier than what some of the different type of risers they put on your compound bows and everything. Now, they were very simple. This is a right-handed bow. If you look right inside of here, this is referred to as the sight window. It's got a little shelf right here. This is basically the arrow rest. When this bow was first made, this had a little patch of moleskin, padded moleskin on the bottom, and there's still one here. Your arrow would rest in here, and then you would pull it back and aim it and fire it. Now, this has got a couple drill holes on this side. I had a hunting sight that bolted on the side of the bow or screwed onto the side of the bow. And then I had sight pins like for 10, 20, 30, and 40 yards. Now, these bows were pretty simple. I mean, when competition archers started really getting active and everything and traveling, a lot of the competition bows were longer. Some of them were like 70, 72, 74 inches. Well, when you were traveling, going from one archery club to another club, that took up quite a bit of room in your vehicle. Well, they decided they started making what they called takedown bows. They were three-piece. The limbs were not solid attached. they would bolt on. You could take an Allen wrench and unbolt them, or there would be like a mousetrap clip that you could unstring it and clip it. Then you could carry this in 3 pieces in like a briefcase, and that made it much easier for transporting. Now, as far as maintenance, on this type of a bow, there's not a whole lot of maintenance, but I want to show you a few things. Like right here on the top and the bottom limb where this bowstring comes down, there's actually a groove. There's actually a groove when this bow was made that they put in here. That is a guide for when you put this bowstring on. Now, periodically, you need to have, like with this bow strung up, you need to check it to make sure that string comes right down the center of that groove on the top and on the bottom. It's the same way. These bows had a tendency, after a period of time, the limbs would twist. Maybe it wasn't much, but instead of that string being lined up perfectly in the center of that limb, it would be offset. Well, that means instead of that limb being flat, it was actually cocked. And if you got a weak limb or twisted limb, that was because the limbs are getting wore out, and you don't want to shoot that. Now, other than that, when you come to storing these bows, I mean, just like this bow is no longer, I mean, I could probably still take it out, shoot it in the yard, or it's even capable of taking a deer. But as far as storing it, if you've got a bow rack, I would recommend like maybe putting it on the wall, excuse me, storing it in a position like this. Or if you want to put it in a bow case unstrung, you can slide it under your bed or store it in a flat, warm, dry area. You never want to leave it strung up like this or even unstrung, then just lay it in the corner with all the weight on that bottom limb, because that will make your limb very weak. Another thing you need to do is always check and make sure you've got a good functional arrow rest, whatever type of arrow rest. They used to have flipper rests. They had like what they called the bear hair rug that fit on here that just had like an adhesive tape on it, and you just stuck it on there. But you got to make sure the arrow rest is good. One of the things you really got to watch, and that is the bowstring. Okay, now this is the bowstring. Now these little fuzzy ball things here, these are string silencers. When you shoot that bow, it makes a noise because the string will slap the limbs, and the deer can hear that. And this slows the speed down some, but it quiets it down. Now the bowstring, the fiber itself, I don't know how well that's showing up, but this is all black. Now you see some orange right here. This is part of the bowstring, but it's the serving. You notice this end is the same way. This is string serving. This is string serving. You never want to or have to put bowstring wax on this. Now that is very simple. You can buy this bowstring wax at any Walmart, any sporting goods store, and it'll last forever. But you need to pay attention. Keep an eye on your string. Now, most of the bowstrings, back when I was making bowstrings for these, most of the strings were like 12, 14 to 16 strands. Anytime the bowstring fiber itself goes to looking fuzzy, you need to put some wax on it. All you do is take it and you rub it. Now, if you notice, I'm behind this serving. I don't want to put this on the serving. Just run this back and forth here a couple times, above it and below the serving. Okay, then when I do that, I will take my finger and my thumb, my index finger, and I'll run that back and forth. And what I'm doing, I'm putting pressure on that, and I can feel that string and that wax getting warm. Well, that's what you want. When you're getting that wax warm, that wax is actually circulating and embedding itself, impregnating itself into that string. Now, if your serving comes loose, does that mean you need a new bowstring? Not necessarily. When you need a new bowstring is if you see this getting fuzzy, if you see it like it's got, some people usually call it frog hair on it. If you ever see it getting fuzzy, that means that it needs lubricated. Now, the time to replace it is if you see any of these strands like on this one here, it's probably, if I remember right, I made this bowstring years ago. I think it was like a 12 strand string. If you see any strands busted, they will stick up. Any of those strands are busted, that's the time to replace your bowstring. And back in the day, it might not be so true today, but if you never knew for sure what, like if this bowstring was to break, and I didn't know what size it was, how would you figure out what size string? Okay. This bow was 58 inches. Usually the bowstring back on these old recurves, the bowstring would be 4 inches shorter than the overall length of the bow. If it was 60 inches, the string would be 56 inches. But a lot of the guys that's got the archery shops and everything, they're pretty well up on strings and everything. But recurves, you can still have a lot of fun with them. You can still shoot targets. You can shoot in your yard with it. Golly, as long as it's within, like the state of Indiana requires a minimum of 35 pounds thrust or on your bow to hunt with. But there's still a lot of people shooting these. They're a lot of fun. They're much prettier than some of the newer compound bows, but which is better? Your recurve bow, your compound bow, or crossbow? That is your decision. There's not a thing wrong with shooting deer with a recurve. There's nothing wrong with shooting them with a compound bow, and there's nothing wrong with taking them with a crossbow. It's whatever works for you. So folks, I hope I've shared some information with you. If you've got, maybe you've got an old recurve laying around, and the first thing you want to do is make sure the limbs are not cracked or not busted. The limbs, if they go to splitting, you don't want to shoot that because you can hurt yourself. The best thing to do with that, just like this bow right here, is pretty sentimental. It was one of the first ones I've ever owned. I just have it around just to look at it and then remember some of the trips that I made with it. So folks, I want to tell you, whatever you want to shoot, shoot it. If it works good for you, that's the main thing. And the idea of it is to have fun, because life is short. You need to do whatever you can to enjoy it. So I want to thank you for coming by and visiting with me. I want to tell you we've got some more information coming up and some more of the segments with Outdoors with Bud. I hope you're going to learn something from it, because I've been having a blast doing it. So thanks for coming by. God bless you. Have a good time. Bye-bye.